Brain Boosters Academy. Ace your exams.
Welcome. Today we'll be looking at fractions. Now, what do we first know? Fraction comprises of a numerator, the number on top, and a denominator, the number at the bottom. Now, a fraction is actually the denominator dividing the numerator. So you could say that a fraction is actually A divided by B. You could say this, you can transform this into this or this into that. That's the first thing you need to know about fractions. Now, the second thing you need to know about fractions is that when the numerator and the denominator are the same, for example, A is the numerator and A is the denominator, then that fraction equates to 1. But if the numerator is a certain number and the denominator is 0, then that fraction is undefined. These are some basic things you need to understand and know about fractions. Right. Let's look at what we do when we are trying to multiply, divide, subtract, or add fractions. Now, when we are multiplying fractions, let's say you have A over B multiplied by C over D. When you're multiplying fractions, you multiply the numerator with the other numerator and the denominator with the other denominator. For example, in this case now, you say A multiplied by C, you get AC. This is over B multiplied by D, you get BD. This is for multiplication. What happens when you're dividing? So now you're dividing A over B divided by C over D. When you're dividing, you have to first change the division sign into the multiplication sign and then take the denominator of the next term, make it a numerator, and take the numerator and make it a denominator. So this would be written as A over B multiplied by, as I just changed that sign, D, which was the numerator, which was the denominator, now becomes the numerator, and C, which was then this numerator, which now becomes the denominator. Then you continue to multiply. A times D is AD over B times C is BC. First. So now let's look at when we add or subtract fractions. Now let's say you have A over B plus C over D. Now the first thing you should note is that before you can add or subtract any two fractions, you have to make both denominators the same. So D and B have to be equal. Now, for a simpler way to do this is to multiply both fractions by 1. 1 which is not going to be written by in this form, but we're going to be guided by the denominators. For example, for this fraction, when we're trying to multiply it by 1, we're going to be guided by the other denominator. So you have D. We also know that D over D is still equals to 1. So you're multiplying D over D multiplied by A over B. You bring the sign C over D. Now for this fraction, you're going to be guided by this denominator. So you'll have multiplied by B over B. Now back to when we multiply fractions, you multiply the numerators, then you multiply the denominators. So you have D times A, which you get AD. Then you have D times B, which you get BD. Plus, you have C times B, you get CB. Then you have D times B, you get DB. Then, when the denominators are both the same, you can now add the numerators. You just bring one denominator down. So you bring down BD all over. You bring the numerators AD, the sign of operation, plus A into CB. Now, this cannot be furthered, so this is where you end. Now, it's still the same thing when you're trying to subtract fractions. Let's say now you have A over B minus C over D. You have to make the denominators the same. We both know that B and D are not the same, so they are not equal. So you have to make them the same. So you multiply by 1 on both terms. Then we change the 1, we are guided by the other denominator, so you have D. So it's going to be D over D multiplied by A over B You bring the sign of operation minus C over D multiplied by, for this one, we're going to be guided by this denominator, B over B. Then back to the laws of multiplication, D times A is AD, D times B is BD, minus C times B is BC over D times B is BD. Now, since the denominators are now the same, we can now bring down one denominator, BD, and include both numerators. You have AD, the sign of operation, minus BC. That's all for today. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
B, A, it's in the brain.